I was 13 the summer my world shrank to the size of a linen closet. My parents, rarely spontaneous, decided on a last-minute weekend trip to a bed and breakfast 3 hours away. They left me in the care of my sister Haley, who was 19, and saw the weekend not as a responsibility, but as a 48-hour party permit. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by woods that felt friendly in the daylight and deeply suspicious after sunset. Haley, after making me a very mediocre frozen pizza, announced she was going to a friend's house. "Don't wait up," she said, pulling on a jacket. "And for the love of God, don't call Mom and Dad unless the house is literally on fire. Text me if you need anything." I just nodded, already relishing the idea of having the whole silent house to myself. The moment her car's headlights disappeared around the corner, I felt a thrilling sense of sovereignty. I was the king of the remote control, the master of the pantry. To celebrate, I did the dumbest thing possible. I scrolled through the horror section of a streaming service and picked the movie with the most ominous, shadowy cover. I made a nest of blankets on the living room couch, bowl of popcorn in hand, and hit play. For the first hour, it was fun. The cheap jump scares made me laugh. But as the plot deepened, so did the shadows in our own living room. The house, usually just a background hum of appliances, began to perform a symphony of creaks. The old oak floors settled with groans that sounded exactly like footsteps. The wind, picking up outside, made the tall pines scrape against the siding like long, bony fingers. A particularly loud scene in the movie made me shriek and spill popcorn everywhere. That was it. My bravado evaporated. I slammed the laptop shut, plunging the room into a silence that felt heavier, more watchful than the noise. I did the classic, panicked sprint up the stairs, refusing to look behind me, convinced something was just at the edge of my vision. I barricaded myself in my room, not just closing the door, but shoving my wooden desk chair under the knob. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Logic tried to fight its way through the fear. It's just the house. It's just the wind. But the animal part of my brain, the part that had just watched a 2-hour primer on how to get murdered in your own home, was in full control. I needed a distraction. I booted up my old console and lost myself in a chaotic, brightly colored racing game, the roar of digital engines drowning out the real-world sounds. I played until my eyes were blurry and the digital clock on my screen read 1:17 a.m. Exhaustion finally beat out the residual fear. I pushed the chair away from the door, reasoning that Haley would be home soon and would freak out if she couldn't get in. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child. I was in that fragile, half-dreaming state when I heard it. Not the wind, not the house settling, a thud, solid and unmistakable, from downstairs. My body went rigid. I strained my ears, every nerve ending screaming. Silence. Then, the soft but distinct creak of the third step from the bottom of the staircase. The one that always sang out, no matter how lightly you tried to tread. Panic, cold and metallic, flooded my mouth. Haley. It had to be Haley. She must have lost her key and come in through the garage side door. But why was she creeping? Why wasn't she calling out, flipping on lights, stomping up to her room like she always did? Another creak, closer to the top of the stairs. I slipped out of bed, my legs wobbly, and crept to my window. Peering through the blinds, I scanned the driveway. Empty. Haley's blue sedan was nowhere to be seen. The reality of my situation crashed down. I was 13. My phone, a dinosaur with a cracked screen, was dead on my dresser. The landline was in the kitchen, a universe away downstairs. The only people who knew I was alone were my sister, who was absent, and my parents, who were unreachable. A new sound froze the blood in my veins. The gentle, rasping scratch of metal on metal. Someone was slowly, carefully, trying the handle of my bedroom door. Logic evaporated. Pure, primal instinct took over. My eyes darted around the room. Under the bed? Too obvious. The window? A 2-story drop. Then I saw it. The door to the narrow, deep linen closet in my bathroom. It was packed with towels and old comforters. I moved faster than I ever had, silently padding into the bathroom and squeezing myself into the closet. I pulled the door shut until it was open only a crack, just enough to see a sliver of the dark bathroom. I crouched behind a stack of beach towels, trying to make myself as small as possible, trying to silence my ragged breathing. I heard my bedroom door open. Not a kick, not a forced entry, a smooth, quiet turn of the knob. The chair I'd moved scraped softly across the floor. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and wrong. They didn't have Haley's quick, familiar rhythm. They were slow, searching. I saw a shadow pass by the sliver of light in my closet door, a tall, distorted shape against the moonlit bathroom tiles. I heard drawers in my dresser being opened, the quiet clink of my trophy for 5th grade science fair being knocked over, the sound of my closet door in the bedroom sliding open, then shut. The intruder was in my space, touching my things, and I was trapped just feet away, hiding behind floral printed towels. Time lost all meaning. It stretched and snapped, each second a lifetime of terror. I heard a low, grunting sound and the drag of something heavy across my bedroom floor. My mind, hysterical, conjured images of body bags, of tools. I pressed my face into a fluffy towel to stifle a sob. Then, the footsteps receded. I heard them move down the hall, toward my parents' room. More faint sounds of rummaging. Eventually, the heavy thud of the front door closing. I didn't move. I stayed curled in that closet, shaking uncontrollably for what felt like centuries. The only thing that finally stirred me was the sound of a car engine, headlights flashing through the bathroom window, and the unmistakable slam of Haley's car door. A minute later, my bedroom light blazed on. "Liam, you in here?" Haley's voice was irritated, not concerned. She saw the disarray, my drawers open, the chair out of place. "What the hell happened? Did you have friends over?" I stumbled out of the linen closet, pale and trembling. My words tumbled out in an incoherent jumble. The noises, the shadow, the empty driveway hiding. Her annoyance vanished, replaced by a dawning, sick horror. She hadn't just lost her key. She'd forgotten to lock the front door altogether. We crept through the house together, turning on every light. The living room TV was gone, the gaming console from the den. My dad's laptop, left on the kitchen counter, was missing. The back door to the patio stood slightly ajar, a silent explanation. Haley, her hands shaking worse than mine, called the police. We sat huddled together on the bottom step of the stairs, wrapped in a blanket, until the flashing red and blue lights filled our driveway. The officers were kind but brisk. They took notes, dusted for fingerprints near the back door, and told us it was likely someone checking for unlocked homes in the neighborhood. "You're lucky," one officer said to me, his gaze meaningfully shifting to the linen closet. "You did the right thing, staying hidden." My parents returned just after dawn, their weekend bliss shattered. My mother rushed to me, holding me so tight I could feel her heart hammering. My father's face was a storm. He didn't say a word to Haley. He just walked up to her, and with a look of pure, furious disappointment, pointed to the empty space where the TV had been. The punishment was unspoken but immense. She was grounded indefinitely, her car keys taken, and she spent the next summer working 2 jobs to pay for the stolen items. I wasn't punished. I was just altered. For years, I couldn't sleep without a light on. The sound of a floorboard creaking would send a jolt of electricity straight to my heart. I had learned, in the most visceral way possible, that safety is an illusion, a fragile lock on a door, and that the scariest monsters aren't the ones on a screen. They're the silent shadows that move through your own home when the lights go out, and the only thing between you and them is a flimsy door and your own frozen, breathless silence. That night in the linen closet never really ended. A part of me is still hiding there, listening, forever 13 and terrified. My earliest memories are wrapped in the smell of pine needles and the quiet safety of my grandparents' house. My mom was young and figuring things out, and my dad worked on the oil rigs, coming home every other weekend smelling of diesel in distant places. So, My world was the worn plaid couch, the ticking grandfather clock, and the two people who were my whole universe. My Uncle Mike, my dad's younger brother, lived in the basement apartment. He was more like a big brother, teaching me how to skip stones on the pond, letting me sip his root beer, his loud laughter filling the house. Our town was the kind where you waved at every car, and everyone knew Mr. Evans at the post office by name. And then there was Carl. Carl lived 2 houses down in a neat blue bungalow. He wasn't family, but he felt like it. He'd come over on Saturdays to help Grandpa fix the fence or tinker with the old John Deere tractor. He'd sit on the porch with Uncle Mike, sharing a 6-pack and talking about baseball. If Grandpa got a deer in the fall, Carl was there to help hang it in the garage, his hands steady and sure. He always had a piece of peppermint candy in his pocket for me. He was just part of the landscape, a friendly, familiar face. I was 5. One evening, Grandma had her book club meeting. Grandpa asked if I wanted to ride along to drop her off. I shook my head, enthralled by the bright colors of my cartoon. "Be back in an hour, champ," Grandpa said, ruffling my hair. "You know the rule. Door stays locked. Don't answer for anyone." I nodded solemnly, the rule etched in my mind. The moment their sedan's taillights vanished, the house settled into a deep, watchful silence. The only sound was the cheerful noise from the TV. It felt like a grand adventure. The knock came less than 10 minutes later. I padded to the door. "Who is it?" "Hey there, sport." "It's Carl." His voice was warm, familiar. "Grandpa's not here," I said through the wood. "I know, I just saw him leave. Is Mike around?" "Uncle Mike's at his friend's house." "Yep, he told me on the phone. Mind if I come in and wait for your grandpa? Left my wrench here earlier." I hesitated. The rule was for strangers. But Carl wasn't a stranger. He was Carl with the peppermints. He helped with the tractor. My small hand reached up and turned the deadbolt. When I opened the door, Carl filled the frame. The porch light behind him cast his face in shadow, but I could smell it, a sharp, sour smell that was different from Uncle Mike's beer. He was unsteady, leaning against the door jamb. His smile looked wrong, like it was too tight for his face. "Good kid," he slurred, and before I could step back, his large hands were on my shoulders. They were heavy, pinning me in place. I tried to wiggle free, a game at first, but his grip tightened, his fingers digging in. "Let's get a snack, huh?" he said, but his voice had lost its peppermint warmth. It was low, grating. He steered me toward the kitchen, his steps clumsy and forceful. Fear, a cold new feeling, began to curl in my stomach. In the kitchen, he didn't look for a snack. His eyes scanned the counter and landed on the wooden block, holding Grandpa's carving knives. He pulled out the biggest one, the one Grandpa used to debone fish. The overhead light glinted off the steel. He turned to me, the friendly neighbor gone, replaced by a terrifying stranger with hollow eyes. He crouched down, bringing the point of the knife level with my stomach. The cold metal pressed through my thin t-shirt. "You ever seen what one of these can do?" he whispered, his breath hot and foul. I was frozen, a rabbit in a snare. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. "You cry, and I'll cut the noise right out of you," he hissed, and he drew the flat, brutal side of the blade slowly across my throat. It didn't cut, but the promise in the gesture stole my breath. Then, a miracle. The crunch of gravel in the driveway. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Hope surged, and a whimper escaped my lips. Carl's hand flew from my throat to clamp over my mouth, stifling the sound. He yanked me against his side, the knife now held near my face as we both faced the back door. The door opened, and Grandma stepped in, her cheerful, "We're back early," dying on her lips. Her grocery bag hit the floor with a thud. For a second, there was only the terrible, silent tableau. Me, trapped. Carl, holding the knife. Grandma, her face draining of all color. She didn't scream. Her voice was a guttural, powerful roar I'd never heard before. "John, now!" The door slammed open again. Grandpa filled the doorway, his eyes taking in the scene in a single flashing instant. The gentleman who taught me to whittle was gone. In his place was something primal, a force of pure, roaring fury. He didn't shout questions. He bellowed Carl's name like a curse and charged. Carl shoved me away so hard I skidded across the linoleum. Grandma was on me in a second, pulling me into her arms, turning my face into her shoulder. "Don't look, baby. Don't look," she chanted. But I could hear it. The brutal, meaty sounds of a struggle, a choked gasp, a crash against the cabinets, a final heavy thud. When the noise stopped, I peeked. Grandpa was hauling a limp, staggering Carl by the collar toward the front door. He threw him out onto the front lawn with a final, thunderous, "If you ever come near this family again, you won't walk away." The door slammed, and the lock turned with a definitive click. The house was silent again. But now the silence was fragile, shocked. Time passed. We never spoke of that night. Carl's blue bungalow went up for sale a month later. People said he'd moved suddenly for a job out west. I grew up, the memory buried deep, a dark fossil in the bedrock of my childhood. Years later, at Grandpa's wake, the house was full of murmured stories and quiet laughter. I found Grandma alone in the kitchen, staring out at the old pine tree. I put my arm around her. "He was something else, wasn't he?" I said softly. I still think about that night with Carl. How fast he moved. How he protected us. Grandma stiffened almost imperceptibly. She looked at me, her old eyes clouded with a pain I hadn't seen before. "That was a bad night," she said, her voice thin. "A terrible night." I always wondered why he went hunting so late after that. I mused, recalling a hazy memory of him leaving well after dark, his rifle case in hand, something he never did for an evening hunt. Grandma turned her gaze back to the window, to the deep woods that started at the edge of our property. She was silent for a long time. "I don't really remember that part," she finally whispered. But her hand found mine and squeezed it hard. A squeeze that felt less like comfort and more like a seal on a secret. It was then that the pieces, dormant for decades, shifted and clicked into a chilling new picture. The lack of police, Carl's sudden, unmentioned disappearance, the profound, unshakable respect the town had for my grandfather, a man who knew those woods better than anyone. A man who, if he were seen hauling a heavy, wrapped load in his truck late at night, would simply be asked if he'd had any luck. It was the spring break of my sophomore year, and for the first time ever, my parents trusted me enough to leave me alone for a long weekend while they visited my aunt a few states over. I was 16, and the freedom felt immense. The plan was simple: sleep until noon, play video games until my eyes bled, and eat an irresponsible amount of pizza. The second night, I was holed up in my room, the blue glow of my monitor the only light, when my phone buzzed. It was Leo, a guy from my chemistry class. We weren't close. We'd partnered on a lab once and exchanged maybe 10 words since. I answered, curious. "Hey, you're home, right?" His voice was tight, skipping any hello. "Yeah, just chilling," I said. "Listen, I need a huge favor. Can I drop off Alex? He just needs a place to crash for the night." Alex. I'd known Alex since we were kids on the same t-ball team. He was always the loudest, funniest guy in the room, completely fearless about looking like an idiot. Lately, though, the stories had shifted. My friend Sam, who had English with him, mentioned Alex had started arguing with the wall-mounted pencil sharpener, convinced it was insulting his grandmother. We'd laughed about it, writing it off as Alex being Alex, dialing his usual weirdness up to 11. "Man, I'm really not up for company," I said, my desire for total solitude outweighing my mild concern. Leo's tone turned pleading, a raw edge in it I'd never heard. "Please, dude, I just can't deal with him right now. I'll give you my whole stash of edibles, the good ones from his cousin in Colorado." That was the lever. I was a dumb 16-year-old with a weekend to myself. "Fine," I sighed. "But just for the night." When they pulled up, the weirdness hit me like a wall of cold air. Alex got out of the passenger side, moving with a stiff, deliberate slowness, like he was underwater. Leo practically leapt from the driver's seat. I took the promised bag of gummies from him. As he turned to leave, he grabbed Alex by both shoulders, his face pale under the porch light. "Alex, swear to me. Swear you won't do the thing." "Not here." Alex looked past him, his eyes focusing on something in the middle distance. "I hear you," he said flatly. Leo shot me a look of pure, unadulterated terror before jumping back in his car and peeling away. I should have run inside and locked the door right then, but I didn't. I let Alex in. The first thing he did was walk past me into the living room, ignoring me completely. He stood in the center of the rug, head cocked, listening. "Are the windows locked?" he asked, not looking at me. "It's a house, man. They're probably latched. Check them. The ones in the back. They know about the back." A cold trickle of dread started in my stomach. I led him to the sunroom, showing him the locked patio door. He nodded slowly, then his arm suddenly jerked straight up into the air, as if yanked by a string. He held it there. A rigid salute to the ceiling fan, a smile stretching his lips that showed all his teeth but didn't touch his eyes. It wasn't a human expression. It was a mask stretched over something else. I let out a nervous, choked laugh. "Dude, what are you doing?" He dropped his arm. "They're quieter when you acknowledge them," he stated, as if explaining the weather. He asked for a drink. In the kitchen, as I pulled 2 sodas from the fridge, I saw him in my peripheral vision. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the block of knives on the counter. His hand drifted toward it, fingers twitching. Every instinct screamed. I dropped the cans, the soda fizzing as it hit the floor, and lunged, slapping my hand over his just as his fingertips brushed a handle. We stood there, frozen in a horrifying tableau, me holding his wrist, him staring at our hands with detached curiosity. "Why would you need a knife, Alex?" My voice was a whisper. He slowly turned his head toward me. "To cut the strings," he whispered back. Then he laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "Just kidding. Relax." I wasn't relaxed. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. The carefree stone buzz was gone, replaced by a crystal clear, sobering terror. I needed him out. "Let's get some air," I blurted. "The park." He considered this, then nodded. "The park is acceptable. The birds there are neutral." I led him to the garage door, my mind racing. "You go ahead. I'll grab my hoodie." He stepped out into the driveway. The second he cleared the threshold, I slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. The click was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Through the small window, I saw him pause, then slowly turn back, his expression unreadable. I didn't wait. I ran to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled twice. I grabbed every single knife from the block, the chef's knife, the paring knives, the long serrated bread knife, and, in a moment of stoned, panicked genius, also grabbed the fireplace poker from the living room. I hauled it all upstairs to my bedroom and barricaded the door with my desk chair. Then I called Sam. "Get here. Now. Bring people. It's Alex." Sam and 2 other guys from the football team were in my driveway in under 4 minutes. From my bedroom window, I watched them approach Alex, who was now sitting cross-legged on the lawn, talking to the grass. I finally went down. Sam was trying to reason with him. "Just take you home, man." Alex looked up, his eyes wide and earnest. "I can't go home. The pipes are talking. My dad's been replacing the copper with conductive wire so the NSA can hear my dreams. He's going to solder my mouth shut tonight." The casual horror of it made my skin crawl. We finally coaxed him into Sam's car with the promise of getting tacos. As they drove off, Alex pressed his face against the rear window, looking back at my house, his expression one of profound sadness. I called Leo. "What the hell, man? What did he say to you?" Leo sounded shattered. "He kept reading from a notebook in the car. A list. It said the only way to silence the broadcast from the fillings in his teeth was to create a major feedback event. He said that meant blood, his or someone else's. I panicked. I couldn't have him in my car anymore. The anger that hit me was hot and sour. "You dumped him on me? With no warning? I gave you the edibles." He shot back, a weak, pathetic defense. Later, we found out the truth. Alex had been experimenting with something he bought off a guy at a party, a synthetic drug meant to mimic an acid trip. For Alex, with a family history nobody talked about, it didn't mimic anything. It ripped a door open in his mind and let something terrible walk in. It triggered a latent severe psychotic episode. He was hospitalized for a while after that. I told my dad weeks later. He listened in stone-faced silence, then simply said, "You will never be left alone like that again." It wasn't a punishment. It was a decree. The trust was incinerated in the space of 1 hour. I never touched the edibles. I threw the whole bag away. For months, I couldn't walk into my kitchen at night without glancing. First, at the empty knife block. I'd replay that moment in slow motion, my hands slapping down on his, the cold steel under my palm. I think about the 2 seconds of hesitation, the time it took for my stone brain to process the threat. I measure my life in the width of that hesitation. Everything that came after my normal life, graduating, going to college, feels like something I was granted on loan. A pardon signed in that narrow, terrifying margin of time between a joke and a disaster.